It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. With those famous words, Orwell introduces us to a world where even time itself has been conscripted by the state. Imagine a world where your thoughts are a crime, your screen watches you back, and the truth is whatever the person in power says it is, even if they say 2 + 2 = 5. In 1984, George Orwell isn't just writing a dystopian novel, he is arguing that language and objective truth are the final frontiers of human freedom. If a regime can colonize your mind by deleting the words you use to express dissent, they don't need to chain your body, you will chain yourself. We aren't just looking at Big Brother. We will analyze the mechanics of doublethink, the psychological warfare of Newspeak, and how these 1949 warnings have manifested in our 2026 landscape of algorithmic manipulation and alternative facts. If you value privacy, independent thought, or work in media and tech, this is your survival manual. However, if you prefer comfort over uncomfortable truths, or believe that if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear, this book will feel like an unprovoked attack. The Genesis and Modern Resonance. The author's journey. Eric Blair, known by his pen name George Orwell, wasn't an ivory tower theorist. He was a man who saw the gears of empire and totalitarianism firsthand. From policing in Burma to fighting fascists in the Spanish Civil War, where he was shot through the throat, Orwell's life was a masterclass in witnessing how power corrupts. He wrote 1984 while dying of tuberculosis on a remote Scottish island, a race against time to warn the world about the shadows he saw lengthening over Europe. Written in 1948, the title is a simple inversion of the year. The book reflects the terrifying dawn of the Cold War. Orwell saw how both Nazi Germany and Stalinist Russia used technology and propaganda to erase the individual. Today, this hits differently because we no longer need a telescreen forced upon us. We carry it in our pockets, voluntarily feeding data to the modern equivalents of the Ministry of Truth.
Key definitions. Newspeak, a controlled language designed to limit freedom of thought by reducing the number of words available to express dissent. Doublethink, the power of holding two contradictory beliefs in one's mind simultaneously and accepting both of them. Example, war is peace. The panopticon effect, the internal policing that happens when you believe you are being watched even if no one is actually looking. The narrative blueprint. The central theme of 1984 is the annihilation of the individual through the systematic destruction of history, language, and memory. It explores the terrifying possibility of a world where power is not a means to an end, but the end itself, sustained by making reality subjective and dissent impossible to even conceptualize. Orwell is teaching us that freedom begins with the ability to say that 2 + 2 = 4. The book serves as a warning that if we allow a central authority, whether a government, a corporation, or a social algorithm, to dictate the definitions of words and the facts of history, we lose the ability to perceive reality. It's a lesson in intellectual self-defense. Once you lose your grip on objective truth, you lose your soul to the collective. Chapter by chapter. To truly understand the collapse of Winston Smith, we must follow his journey chronologically across the book's three-part structure. We will break down all 24 chapters one by one, starting today with the chilling introduction to Oceania in Part 1, Chapter 1. Part 1. The Architecture of Oppression. Chapter 1. The Watcher and the Watched. What if your own home was your greatest enemy? In this opening, Orwell challenges the idea that privacy is a natural right. Instead, he argues that in a totalist state, the very concept of a private life is a revolutionary act of war. Orwell introduces Winston Smith, a low-ranking member of the party in a decaying London. Winston returns to his flat, avoiding the gaze of Big Brother posters, and commits the ultimate crime. He opens a diary. This act of recording his own thoughts marks him as a thought criminal. Beneath the surface, this chapter explores the psychology of self-censorship. By placing telescreens in every room, the party doesn't have to watch you every second. They only have to make you believe they are. This creates a permanent state of internal anxiety that kills the soul. In 2026, this shows up in digital footprints. For example, imagine someone who deletes a social media post, not because it's wrong, but because they fear a future employer or cancel culture might misinterpret it. Applying this chapter means recognizing how being watched changes our authentic behavior. Applying it today is harder because we choose our telescreens. In 1948, the state installed them. In 2026, we pay monthly subscriptions for them. Our data harvesting is voluntary, making the surveillance far more intimate and harder to resist. Orwell assumes the state is the only entity interested in total surveillance. In reality, private corporations and advertising algorithms have achieved a level of thought sensing that the party in 1984 could only dream of through predictive modeling. If you cannot be alone with your thoughts, you are already a prisoner.
Chapter 2: The Junior Spies. Most people believe the bond between parent and child is unbreakable. This chapter flips that belief. Orwell argues that a sufficiently powerful ideology can transform your own children into your most dangerous informants. Winston assists his neighbor, Mrs. Parsons, with a blocked sink while her children, members of the Junior Spies, viciously play at capturing thought criminals. The main argument is that the party systematically replaces family loyalty with absolute devotion to Big Brother. Beneath the surface, this is about the weaponization of innocence. It's not just about surveillance, it's about how humans naturally seek belonging. The party hijacks the playfulness of childhood to create a generation of tigers who police their own parents. In 2026, this shows up in algorithmic radicalization. Instead of the junior spies, we see young people being indoctrinated by niche internet subcultures that encourage them to cancel or disconnect from family members who hold differing views. In a world of digital echo chambers, the peer pressure to conform begins in the nursery. Orwell assumes human biology is easily overridden by propaganda. In reality, the parental instinct is one of the few forces that historically resists even the most brutal totalist regimes. When the state becomes the father, the biological family becomes an enemy of progress. Chapter 3: The Distortion of Memory. What if your childhood memories were illegal? In this chapter, Orwell challenges the idea that the past is a fixed record. Instead, he argues that memory is a battleground where the state fights for total ownership of your identity. Winston wakes from a dream of his mother and sister, feeling a profound, unconscious grief that the party has made obsolete. The main argument is that by controlling the present, the party can rectify the past, making their current alliances and wars appear eternal through physical jerks, mandatory exercise, and propaganda. Beneath the surface, this chapter is about the annihilation of tragedy. It's not just about history books, it's about how humans naturally need a sense of continuity. What Orwell points to is a deeper truth. Without a stable past, the individual has no foundation to stand on to resist the present. In real life, this shows up in digital revisionism. For example, imagine a public figure who quietly deletes old tweets, or an article that is silently edited without a correction notice. Instead of learning from history, we patch it to fit the current narrative. Applying this today is harder because of the sheer volume of data.
When this book was written, memory holes were physical furnaces. In 2026, the memory hole is an algorithm that buries inconvenient facts under a mountain of new, distracting content. The author assumes that people will simply forget. In reality, the Internet Archive and blockchain technology make it nearly impossible to truly erase the past, even if the majority chooses to ignore it. He who controls the past controls the future. He who controls the present controls the past. Chapter 4: The Records Department. Most people believe that truth is discovered, but this chapter flips that belief completely. Orwell argues that in a bureaucracy of power, truth isn't discovered, it is manufactured, packaged, and distributed like a consumer product. In this chapter, the author explains Winston's daily work at the Ministry of Truth, where he rewrites old news articles to match Big Brother's current predictions. The key concept here is rectification, a polite word for the systematic forging of historical documents to ensure the party is never wrong. But beneath the surface, this chapter is really about the death of objective reality. It's not just about lies, it's about how humans naturally prioritize the team over the truth. What the author is pointing to is that once you help create the lie, you become an accomplice to the system. In the workplace, this shows up when data is massaged to meet a quarterly KPI. For example, imagine a manager who adjusts the parameters of a report so the results look green for the board. Applying this chapter means recognizing when we are rectifying our own failures. In a world of generative AI, this reality is even frightening. When this book was written, faking a photo took hours in a darkroom. In 2026, deepfakes and AI-generated history can be created in seconds, making rectification automated and infinite. That said, this chapter may oversimplify the human conscience. The author assumes that people like Winston can suppress the truth indefinitely, but internal whistleblowers often emerge because the human mind struggles to hold a manufactured reality for long. When the record is rewritten every day, the concept of the truth ceases to exist. Chapter 5: The Newspeak Lab. What if you couldn't even think about rebellion because the word rebellion didn't exist? This chapter challenges the idea that thoughts come before words. Instead, it argues that if you shrink the language, you shrink the range of human consciousness itself. Winston has lunch with Syme, a philologist working on the 11th edition of the Newspeak dictionary. The main argument is that the goal of Newspeak isn't to express ideas, but to destroy them. The key concept is narrowing the range of thought until thought crime becomes literally impossible. Beneath the surface, this is about the philosophy of linguistic determinism. It's not just about vocabulary, it's about how humans naturally use language to categorize the world. If you remove the word freedom, the feeling of being unfree becomes a nameless, dull ache that can't be organized into a revolt. In social media, this shows up in emoji speak and character limits. For example, imagine a complex political debate reduced to a like or dislike button. Instead of nuanced discourse, we apply good or ungood labels, effectively lobotomizing our own ability to handle complexity. However, applying this today is harder because of slang. While the party tries to delete words, the internet constantly creates them. In a world of vibe coding and brain rot terms, language is evolving faster than any ministry could ever prune it. The author assumes that thought is entirely dependent on language. Many neuroscientists argue that we have pre-linguistic thoughts and instincts that can sense injustice even if we lack the specific vocabulary to name it. The ultimate cage is not made of iron bars, but of missing words. Chapter 6: The Desert of Intimacy. What if the most private act in human existence was turned into a cold, bureaucratic duty? In this chapter, Orwell challenges the idea that desire is just biological. Instead, he argues that the state's greatest weapon is the erasure of pleasure. In this chapter, Winston writes in his diary about an encounter with a prole prostitute and reflects on his failed marriage to Catherine. The main argument is that the party seeks to remove all pleasure from the sexual act, turning it into a minor operation to produce new party members. Beneath the surface, this is about the politicization of the libido. It's not just about Puritanism, it's about how humans naturally possess a private energy that the state cannot control. By suppressing sex, the party redirects that frustrated energy into war fever and leader worship. In 2026, this shows up in the loneliness epidemic. For example, imagine a society where digital microdoses of dopamine, scrolling, replace the messy, uncontrollable vulnerability of real-world relationships. Instead of deep intimacy, we settle for efficient digital connections. Applying this today is harder because we aren't being forced into celibacy by a state, we are being distracted into it by convenience culture. In a world of infinite porn and dating apps, the meaning of intimacy is being eroded by oversaturation, not deprivation. The author assumes that the state can successfully kill the sex instinct. History shows that even in the most repressive regimes, the underground economy of desire is the one thing the authorities can never fully extinguish. When the state controls your body's desires, it owns your heart's loyalty. Chapter 7. The Hope of the Proles. Most people believe that revolution starts with the intellectuals, but this chapter flips that belief completely. Orwell argues that the educated are the most easily brainwashed and that the only real hope for change lies in the unthinking masses. Winston writes that if there is hope, it lies in the proles, the 85% of the population living in poverty outside the party's direct scrutiny. The key concept here is that while the proles have the strength to topple the party, they lack the consciousness to do so. But beneath the surface, this chapter is a critique of class insulation. It's not just about poverty, it's about how humans naturally focus on immediate survival. The party keeps the proles free only because they are kept too busy with beer, gambling, and football to think. In real life, this shows up in bread and circuses politics. For example, imagine a population more concerned with a celebrity scandal or a sports result than with a massive change in privacy laws. Applying this chapter means looking at what distracts us from our own power. In 2026, the prole experience is mirrored in the gig economy. When you are working 3 jobs just to survive the cost of living, you don't have the intellectual luxury to worry about the slow erosion of constitutional rights. Orwell is somewhat elitist here. He assumes the working class are incapable of intellectual awakening without a Winston to guide them. This overlooks many historical grassroots movements that were highly sophisticated and self-led. Until they become conscious, they will never rebel, and until after they have rebelled, they cannot become conscious. Chapter 8. The Relic of the Past. What if you found a piece of evidence that proved your entire world was a lie? In this final chapter of Part 1, Orwell explores the point of no return. Instead of safety, Winston chooses to walk directly into the jaws of the secret police. Winston wanders into a prole neighborhood, visits an antique shop owned by Mr. Charrington, and buys a glass paperweight. The main argument is that objects carry the weight of truth. He realizes that, in the end, the party would announce that 2 and 2 made 5, and you would have to believe it. Beneath the surface, this chapter is about the thirst for tangible truth. It's not just about a glass trinket, it's about how humans naturally need anchors to reality. By buying the paperweight, Winston is attempting to tether himself to a world that actually existed. In the workplace or social media, this shows up as gaslighting. For example, imagine a company that changes its policy and then claims it was always this way. Holding on to the paperweight means keeping a record of what was actually said, regardless of the new narrative. Applying this today is harder because of post-truth fatigue. When everything is fake news, people stop looking for the paperweight altogether and just accept whatever truth makes them feel most comfortable in the moment. The author assumes that the past is inherently better or more truthful. This ignores the fact that the pre-party world was also full of its own brands of propaganda and systemic injustice. The ultimate act of rebellion is believing your own eyes over the dictates of power.
Part 2. The Flesh and the Spirit. Chapter 1. The Note. What if a total stranger handed you a note that could either save your soul or end your life? Orwell challenges the idea that love is a private emotion. In a world of hate, he argues that a simple "I love you" is a political act of high treason. In this chapter, the dark-haired girl from the Ministry of Truth, Julia, trips and hands Winston a folded slip of paper. Expecting a death threat from the thought police, Winston is shocked to find 3 words: "I love you." This moment shifts the narrative from intellectual dread to desperate hope. Beneath the surface, this chapter explores the instinctive nature of human connection. It's not just about romance, it's about how humans naturally seek the other as a mirror. The party can control the streets, but they cannot fully predict the spontaneous surge of empathy between 2 individuals. In the workplace, this shows up in back-channel communication. For example, imagine 2 employees who realize through a subtle glance or a private message that they both disagree with a toxic corporate directive. That shared secret creates a microculture that the institution cannot reach. Applying this today is harder because of data privacy decay. In 1948, a physical note was relatively safe. In 2026, every "I love you" sent via an app is a data point stored on a server, potentially indexed by an AI to determine your social influence or emotional state. Orwell relies heavily on the slip of paper as a plot device. While dramatic, it assumes that Julia, an expert at navigating the party's rules, would take such an incredibly reckless risk based on a mere vibe that Winston was a rebel. The shortest distance between 2 people is a secret they both share. Chapter 2. The Golden Country. Most people believe that freedom is an abstract legal concept, but this chapter flips that belief completely. Orwell argues that freedom is a sensory experience: the smell of a field, the sound of a bird, and the touch of another human being away from the glare of a screen. Winston and Julia meet in a hidden woodland glade. They engage in a sexual encounter that Winston explicitly views as a political act. The key concept here is the Golden Country, a recurring dreamscape in Winston's mind that finally manifests in reality. But beneath the surface, this chapter is really about reclaiming the body. It's not just about sex, it's about how humans naturally use pleasure to resist psychological conditioning. By enjoying their bodies for themselves, they are effectively stealing property back from the state. In real life, this shows up in the digital detox. For example, imagine someone who intentionally leaves their phone at home to walk in the woods. By removing the telescreen, the notifications, you are reclaiming your attention and your biological self from the attention economy. In 2026, the Golden Country is harder to find because of satellite surveillance and geotagging. There is almost no square inch of the planet that isn't mapped, photographed, or within range of a cell tower, making untracked space a luxury of the past. The author assumes that sex is an inherently liberalizing force. However, many modern psychologists point out that desire can also be used as a tool of control. For example, Brave New World's use of sex to keep people distracted, a nuance Orwell ignores here.
Every moment of authentic pleasure is a blow struck against the architecture of control. Chapter 3: The Practical Rebel. What if the most effective way to survive a cult is to be its most enthusiastic member? This chapter challenges the idea of the obvious rebel. Instead, Julia teaches Winston that the safest place to hide is behind a mask of perfect conformity. As they continue their affair in secret, Julia explains her philosophy. She hates the party, but has no interest in overthrowing it. She only wants to break the rules and stay alive. The main argument is that the party's purity is a sham maintained by those who know how to play the game. Beneath the surface, this chapter is about performative loyalty. It's not just about hiding, it's about how humans naturally adapt to survive. Julia is a rebel from the waist down, highlighting the difference between Winston's intellectual rebellion and her visceral, pragmatic survivalism. In social media, this shows up in virtue signaling. For example, imagine a user who posts the correct hashtags and black squares, not because they believe in them, but because it provides social cover to avoid being targeted by the digital mob. However, applying this today is harder because of algorithmic consistency. In 1948, you just had to look enthusiastic in person. In 2026, AI can analyze your digital history over 10 years to find a single moment where your mask slipped, making perfect conformity nearly impossible. Orwell portrays Julia as less intellectual than Winston, which borders on a gendered stereotype of the era. He implies that women rebel for feelings, while men rebel for ideas, ignoring that Julia's survival strategy is arguably more brilliant than Winston's. If you keep the small rules, you can break the big ones. Chapter 4: The Paperweight Sanctuary. What if a dusty room and a glass ornament were more valuable than a fortune? Orwell challenges the idea that safety is a physical state. Instead, he argues that sanctuary is a psychological necessity, a place where 2 + 2 can still equal 4. Winston rents the room above Mr. Charrington's shop as a permanent trysting place for him and Julia. He brings the glass paperweight, viewing the room as a world outside of time. The key concept here is the impregnable internal, the belief that a private space can remain untouched by the state. Beneath the surface, this is about the fetishization of normalcy. By making tea and watching Julia use makeup, Winston is trying to reconstruct a civilian life. Orwell points to a deeper truth: humans will risk death just to experience a few hours of ordinary, unobserved existence. In 2026, this shows up in encrypted spaces. For example, imagine using an end-to-end encrypted app to speak freely with a partner. We treat these digital rooms as sanctuaries, believing the walls of the code protect us from the party of big data. Applying this today is harder because of the Internet of Things. In 1948, a room without a telescreen was a safe haven. In 2026, a silent room might still have a smart speaker or a phone microphone listening, making true sanctuary a technical rarity. Orwell uses the paperweight as a heavy-handed metaphor for the past. While poetic, it highlights Winston's fatal flaw. His nostalgia makes him blind to the very obvious dangers of trusting a stranger like Mr. Charrington. The most dangerous thing you can own is a place where you feel safe. Chapter 5: The Speed of Decay. Most people believe that war is a temporary crisis, but this chapter flips that belief completely. Orwell argues that in a totalist state, war is a permanent background noise designed to keep the population in a state of productive hysteria. As Hate Week approaches, the city descends into a frenzy of preparation. Winston notices that Syme, the Newspeak expert, has vanished, literally erased from existence. The main argument is that the party uses constant preparation for war to justify the deprivation of its citizens. Beneath the surface, this is about unpersoning. It's not just about murder, it's about the psychological toll of being forced to pretend someone never existed. It demonstrates how humans naturally prioritize their own safety by choosing to forget those who fall out of favor. In the workplace, this shows up as corporate erasure. For example, when a high-level executive is suddenly fired, their name is scrubbed from the website, and their projects are reassigned within hours. We are trained to move on as if they were never there. In a world of cancel culture, this happens at scale. Someone can be deleted from the public consciousness overnight. In 2026, digital history is so malleable that unpersoning is achieved via algorithmic shadow banning rather than physical disappearance. The author assumes the public is entirely fooled by these disappearances. History suggests that while people pretend to forget for safety, the collective memory of the missing often fuels the eventual fire of revolution. A society that can delete its people can eventually delete the truth. Chapter 6: The Invitation. What if the person you fear most is actually your only ally? In this chapter, Orwell explores the lure of the inner circle. Instead of running away, Winston walks directly into the lion's den, mistaking a predator's invitation for a savior's hand. O'Brien, a high-ranking inner party member, finally approaches Winston in a hallway. He makes a coded reference to Winston's thought crime and gives him his home address under the guise of lending him a dictionary. This is the moment Winston believes the Brotherhood, the resistance, is real. Beneath the surface, this is about the vulnerability of hope. It's not just about a meeting, it's about how humans naturally seek a higher power or a mentor when they're lost. Winston is so desperate for a father figure that he ignores every red flag O'Brien presents. In real life, this shows up in phishing and social engineering. For example, imagine a scammer who gains your trust by pretending to share your values or frustrations. We are most likely to be betrayed by those who tell us exactly what we want to hear. However, applying this today is harder because of deepfake sincerity. In 2026, an adversary doesn't even need to meet you in a hallway. They can use AI to mimic the voice and face of a trusted leader to lead you into a trap. Orwell makes O'Brien almost supernatural in his ability to read Winston. This borders on villainous omniscience, making the antagonist seem less like a man and more like an unstoppable force of nature, which can undermine the realism of the political critique. The most effective trap is the one you have been searching for your entire life. Chapter 7: The Inner Betrayal. What if the only thing you had left was the ability to feel? In this chapter, Orwell challenges the idea that survival is merely staying alive. Instead, he argues that the only true survival is refusing to stop loving. Winston and Julia discuss the certainty of their eventual arrest. Winston recalls his mother's disappearance, realizing that the Proles have stayed human because they value feelings over utility. The key concept is the inviolable core, the belief that the party can kill you, but they cannot make you stop loving someone. Beneath the surface, this is about the limitations of power. It's not just about torture. It's about how humans naturally believe in an inner soul that remains private. Orwell is setting up the tragic irony of the book. Winston's last shred of hope is based on a psychological boundary the party is about to demolish. In real life, this shows up in personal integrity. For example, imagine a whistleblower who loses their job but keeps their conscience. Instead of prioritizing career safety, applying this chapter means recognizing that your internal values are your only true possession. In 2026, this is harder because of predictive emotion AI. The party had to guess what you felt. Today, biometric sensors and sentiment analysis can map our emotional shifts in real time, making an inner secret technically harder to hide.
Orwell romanticizes the proles as the keepers of humanity. He ignores that poverty and desperation can often strip away empathy just as effectively as state brainwashing. The object is not to stay alive, but to stay human.
Chapter 8. The Brotherhood's Oath. Would you be willing to throw acid in a child's face for the greater good? This chapter flips our view of Winston as a hero. Orwell argues that in fighting a monster, the rebel often agrees to become a monster themselves. Winston and Julia visit O'Brien's luxurious apartment. Believing they are joining the Brotherhood, they swear an oath to commit acts of sabotage, murder, and terrorism to topple the party. The main argument is that there is no moral way to fight a totalist regime. This chapter is about ethical erosion. It's not just about politics, it's about how humans naturally justify evil in the name of a cause. By agreeing to O'Brien's horrific terms, Winston proves that he has already lost his moral compass to the same ends justify the means logic the party uses. In social media, this shows up as toxic partisanship. For example, imagine someone who justifies doxing or harassment because the target holds the wrong views. We become what we hate by using the enemy's tactics to fight them. Applying this today is harder because of digital extremism. In 1948, joining a cell required a physical meeting. In 2026, people are radicalized into brotherhoods via encrypted forums, often agreeing to extreme views before they've even met an ally. The author makes the Brotherhood feel almost too similar to the party. This might lead the reader to feel nihilistic. If both sides are evil, why root for Winston at all? To defeat the party, Winston agrees to lose the very humanity he was trying to save. Chapter 9. The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism. Most people believe that power is used to achieve something, but this chapter flips that belief completely. Orwell argues that power is not a tool, it is the destination. There is no why behind the cruelty other than the cruelty itself. Winston reads the book by Emmanuel Goldstein, which explains the mechanics of Oceania. It reveals that war is waged to use up surplus goods and keep the hierarchy stable. The key concept is doublethink, the ability to hold two contradictory beliefs while believing both are true. Beneath the surface, this is a masterclass in political science. It's not just about a fictional world, it's about how humans naturally use the enemy to justify internal control. What the author is pointing to is that a state of permanent crisis is the most efficient way to rule. In real life, this shows up in manufactured outrage. For example, imagine a news cycle that keeps you in a state of constant fear about a distant threat to prevent you from noticing local corruption. Applying this chapter means looking for the war being used to distract you. In a world of infinite content, this logic is automated. Algorithms don't need a Goldstein, they just need engagement. In 2026, the permanent war is the culture war, which keeps us divided and profitable for the platforms. This chapter is essentially a long essay embedded in a novel. While intellectually brilliant, it slows the narrative pace to a crawl, potentially losing readers who are more invested in the characters than the theory. The party seeks power entirely for its own sake. Chapter 10. The Glass Shatters. What if the safe space you built was actually a stage set for your execution? In this final chapter of Part 2, Orwell challenges our sense of security. The paperweight of the past doesn't protect you, it shatters. Winston and Julia are finally arrested in their secret room. They discover that the hidden telescreen was behind the picture of St. Clement's Church all along. The ultimate betrayal is revealed. Mr. Charrington is a member of the Thought Police.
This chapter is about the inevitability of the state. It's not just an arrest, it's the destruction of the private world Winston thought he had created. The shattering of the glass paperweight symbolizes the final end of the old world and the old truth. In the workplace, this shows up as the illusion of privacy. For example, imagine an employee using private Slack channels to criticize management, only to realize the company logs everything. Applying this chapter means assuming that anything digital is never truly private. Applying this today is harder because of smart home vulnerabilities. In 1948, the camera was behind a painting. In 2026, the telescreen is our smart fridge, our doorbell, and our vacuum, all potentially acting as witnesses against us. Orwell's twist is masterful, but it relies on the party being incredibly patient. The idea that they would let Winston and Julia carry on for months just to catch them seems like an inefficient use of resources for a regime built on total control. There are no blind spots in a world where the walls have ears.
Part 3. The Systematic Deconstruction of Man. Chapter 1. The Place Where There Is No Darkness. What if the place where there is no darkness wasn't a paradise, but a nightmare of neon lights and sleeplessness? Orwell challenges the idea that truth sets you free. In this chapter, he argues that truth is irrelevant when pain becomes the only reality. Winston is imprisoned in a high-security cell where the lights are never turned off. He encounters other prisoners, including Parsons, turned in by his own daughter. The main argument is that the party's power is absolute because it controls the environment, the body, and the biological clock of the prisoner. Beneath the surface, this is about sensory deprivation as a weapon. It's not just about jail, it's about how humans naturally lose their sense of self when they lose their connection to time and nature. What Orwell points to is that the soul is surprisingly dependent on a regular sleep cycle and a dark room. In the workplace, this shows up in burnout culture. For example, imagine a high-pressure job where you were expected to be on call 24/7. When the lights never go out on your professional responsibilities, your ability to think critically or resist toxic environments erodes. Applying this today is harder because of the attention economy. In 2026, we are trapped in a place of no darkness by our smartphone screens. The constant blue light and notification stream act as a form of voluntary psychological exhaustion that makes us more suggestible to trends. Orwell assumes that physical exhaustion leads to immediate compliance. While true for many, history shows that some of the most profound resistance movements were born in the darkest cells, where the lack of external distraction actually sharpened the prisoner's focus. You cannot maintain a revolution if you cannot maintain your grip on time. Chapter 2. The High Priest of Power. Most people believe that torture is used to get information, but this chapter flips that belief completely. Orwell argues that the party doesn't want your secrets, they want your soul. They don't want to kill you for disagreeing, they want to change you so that you agree. O'Brien reveals himself as Winston's interrogator. He subjects Winston to excruciating physical pain via a dial-operated machine. The key concept here is that the party is not interested in martyrs. Their goal is to cure Winston by making him truly believe that 2 + 2 = 5. Beneath the surface, this is about cognitive colonization. It's not just about pain, it's about the breakdown of logic. O'Brien represents the idea that reality is not something that exists in nature, but something that is collectively agreed upon by those in power. In real life, this shows up in gaslighting in relationships. For example, imagine a partner who insists a shared memory never happened. Eventually, the victim stops trusting their own eyes and begins to rely on the abuser's version of reality just to stop the emotional conflict. In a world of deepfakes and post-truth, O'Brien's logic is winning. When any video can be faked, the average person stops asking, "Is this true?" and starts asking, "Who do I want to believe?" In 2026, truth has become a team sport. Orwell makes O'Brien almost godlike in his intellect. In reality, totalist regimes are often run by mediocre bureaucrats rather than philosophical geniuses, which can make their control more chaotic and less perfect than Orwell depicts. The ultimate victory of power is to make the victim love their oppressor.
Chapter 3. The Philosophy of the Boot. What is the future of humanity? In this chapter, O'Brien gives the most terrifying answer in literature. He challenges the idea of progress, arguing that the future isn't a utopia, but a boot stamping on a human face forever. O'Brien explains the party's motive. Power is not a means, it is the end. They have eliminated the illusions of justice or happiness. The main argument is that by making people suffer, you prove your power over them. If they are happy, they are autonomous. If they suffer, they are yours. This chapter is a deconstruction of nihilism. It's not just about cruelty, it's about the total rejection of humanism. Orwell is pointing to the hidden layer of politics. If power is the only value, then there is no limit to what can be done to the individual. In the workplace, this shows up in management by fear. For example, a leader who intentionally keeps staff on edge with random layoffs to ensure total, unquestioning obedience. It's not about efficiency, it's about the raw exercise of control. Applying this today is harder because power has become invisible and soft. In 2026, the boot is often replaced by the nudge. We are manipulated by algorithms to behave in certain ways, not through pain, but through the promise of a like or a discount. Orwell assumes that a system built entirely on pain and hate can be stable. Historically, regimes that fail to provide at least some level of material benefit or hope to their subjects eventually collapse due to their internal friction. Power is not a tool to build a world. Power is the act of breaking the world. Chapter 4. The Mind's Submission. What if you could convince yourself that 2 + 2 = 5, even when no one was looking? In this chapter, Orwell explores the surrender of the intellect. It's not about being forced to lie. It's about the terrifying human ability to choose to believe a lie for the sake of peace. Winston is given a period of recovery. He begins to practice crime stop, the habit of stopping short, as though by instinct, at the threshold of any dangerous thought. The main argument is that Winston is trying to re-educate himself, attempting to use doublethink to genuinely accept the party's reality. Beneath the surface, this is about the path of least resistance. It's not just about brainwashing, it's about how humans naturally seek to align their internal world with their external circumstances to end suffering. What Orwell points to is that the mind is a traitor that will eventually collaborate with its captor. In 2026, this shows up in echo chamber adaptation. For example, imagine a person who joins a highly polarized online community. To avoid social pain, downvotes, or bans, they eventually stop playing devil's advocate and start genuinely believing the extreme views of the group. Applying this today is harder because we are constantly A/B tested. In 1948, the party used torture. In 2026, social media platforms use dopamine rewards to condition our thoughts. We crime stop our unpopular opinions because the algorithm rewards our conformity. Orwell portrays the mind as a fragile thing that can be permanently rewired. However, many survivors of totalist re-education camps report that while they performed conformity, a secret self often remained hidden and untouched in the deep subconscious. The most effective prison is the one you help build inside your own head.
Chapter 5. Room 101. What is the one thing in the world you cannot bear? Orwell argues that every human has a breaking point, a fear so primal that for it to stop, you would be willing to sacrifice the person you love most. Winston is taken to the dreaded Room 101, which contains the worst thing in the world. For Winston, it is rats. Faced with a cage of starving rats strapped to his face, he screams the words the party has been waiting for. "Do it to Julia, not me." This chapter is about the destruction of the moral self. By betraying Julia, Winston doesn't just save his skin, he destroys his own integrity. The party's goal wasn't to kill him, but to make him unlovable to himself. Once he has betrayed his last human bond, he is truly empty. In real life, this shows up as self-preservation over solidarity. For example, imagine a workplace where colleagues are pressured to throw someone under the bus to save their own careers. When we prioritize our safety over our loyalty, we enter our own version of Room 101. In a world of doxing and public shaming, Room 101 has gone digital. The fear of social annihilation is so great that people will frequently turn on their friends or delete their history to avoid the wraths of a digital mob. The author assumes that a single moment of betrayal can never be healed. While psychologically devastating, human history is full of examples of people who betrayed others under torture and later found ways to seek redemption or continue the fight. Power is the ability to make a person value their life more than their love. Chapter 6. The Final Victory. Most people believe that a tragedy ends with the hero's death, but this chapter flips that belief completely. Orwell argues that the true tragedy isn't Winston's death, it's the fact that he survives, but the Winston we knew is gone. Winston sits in the Chestnut Tree Cafe, a broken man drinking gin. He sees Julia, and they both admit they betrayed each other. The spark is dead. As a news bulletin announces a military victory, Winston looks at the poster of Big Brother and feels a sense of warmth. The final line, "He loved Big Brother." Beneath the surface, this is the death of the individual. It's not just about a change of heart, it's about the total absorption of the person into the collective. Orwell points to a deeper truth. Once you are stripped of your past, your language, and your love, you will fill the void with whatever power remains. In the workplace, this shows up as institutionalization. For example, an employee who starts with a desire to change a corrupt system, but eventually becomes its most loyal defender, having forgotten why they ever wanted to fight in the first place. Applying this today is harder because of the fluidity of identity. In 2026, we are encouraged to change our brand constantly. The danger isn't that we will love one Big Brother, but that we will lose ourself by trying to love every trending brother the algorithm presents. The ending is famously nihilistic. Some critics argue that by giving the party a total victory, Orwell creates a sense of hopelessness that might actually discourage people from resisting rather than serving as a warning to be vigilant. The state's victory is complete only when you no longer want to be free. The illusion versus reality structure. We are told that totalitarianism is maintained through physical force. Common belief suggests that as long as we aren't being arrested or physically harmed, we are free. We view Big Brother as a man in a military uniform, holding a whip, ruling through the external threat of the gulag or the executioner's bullet. But Orwell argues something radical. True power is maintained through the internal destruction of objective truth. The party realized that physical chains are inefficient because they create martyrs. Instead, they use Doublethink and Newspeak to reshape the mind so that it cannot even conceive of a world outside the party.
The reality of Oceania is a psychological state where the individual is gaslit until they lose the ability to trust their own senses. And here's what most summaries miss. The party's goal is not to stop rebellion, but to make it irrelevant. By controlling the past and the language, the party removes the intellectual tools necessary for a revolution. If you don't have a word for freedom or a memory of justice, you can feel an ache of dissatisfaction, but you can never organize it into a movement. The hidden layer is that the party doesn't just want you to obey, they want you to be incapable of imagining anything else.
Key lessons and real-life examples. The weaponization of language. If you control the vocabulary, you control the range of thought. 2026 example, the shift from nuanced debate to labeling, e.g. calling every disagreement hate speech or misinfo, simplifies complex issues into binary good-ungood blocks. The fragility of objective truth. 2 + 2 = 4 is the ultimate defensive line for freedom. 2026 example, when deepfakes make video evidence unreliable, truth becomes a matter of tribal loyalty rather than observable fact. The utility of permanent crisis. War is used to justify the erosion of domestic rights. 2026 example, the war on X, drugs, terror, viruses, often results in permanent surveillance powers that outlive the initial threat. The illusion of digital privacy. There is no private room in a networked world. 2026 example, your private messages are data points used to build a predictive model of your future behavior. Emotional redirection. Frustration with the state is redirected towards a scapegoat. 2026 example, instead of addressing systemic economic issues, social algorithms feed us rage bait about our neighbors to keep us divided. A challenge for you. For the next 24 hours, practice reverse doublethink. Identify one instance where you are holding two contradictory ideas because it is socially or professionally easier to do so. Write down the objective truth of the situation in a physical notebook, not a digital one. By documenting a fact that cannot be remotely updated or deleted by an algorithm, you are creating your own modern-day glass paperweight. Orwell's 1984 isn't a funeral for freedom, it's a siren for the living. It reminds us that the boot only stamps when we stop believing in our own eyes.